In February of this year, Mark Zuckerberg paid $170 million for a mansion on a Miami island they call the Billionaire Bunker. He wasn't moving for the weather. He was running from a single line of text on a piece of paper in Sacramento. This November, Californians vote on something called the Billionaire Tax Act, a one-time 5% tax, only on people worth more than $1 billion, roughly 200 people in the entire state. If it passes, it raises an estimated $100 billion for healthcare, food assistance, and public schools. And it has triggered the most expensive, most bizarre class war in the history of the state. Democrats are fighting Democrats. Billionaires are buying mansions they don't legally need. And there's a trap buried in the fine print that some of the smartest lawyers in America have spent over a year trying to escape. To understand why 200 people are this scared, you first have to understand why this tax exists at all, and why the other side thinks it's a catastrophe. So let's actually do this properly. Both sides. No cheerleading.
Why don't we just do the simple things in life, like deal with the estate tax, like deal with carried interest, like deal with real estate loopholes and all sorts of other things? What is the problem here that we're having to go into these other sort of mechanisms?
Well, we should do all the things you say. I'll tell you what the challenge is. I mean, I represent a district that has $11 trillion of market cap. People say manufacturing is bled in this country. Wages have stagnated. And look at Rose District. All the wealth is piling up there, all these billionaires. And by the way, a lot of these billionaires aren't paying the same tax as firefighters, as teachers, as police officers. So there's anger in the country. I tell this to all my constituents who are billionaires, and many of them are saying, okay, we can pay 20%. Now, we can come to the details on how that should be done, but I think everyone can agree that people who've made billions of dollars ought to be paying at least 20% in tax.
When you say making billions of dollars, but in unrealized gains?
Well, first of all, a lot of these folks have realized gains or have sold their stock. It's not like many of them all have unrealized gains. And I understand the problem of unrealized gains if you're giving stock options to a software engineer who's worth $150,000. We're talking about people who are worth over $100 million here. I mean, this is not going to be a hardship for many of them. I have a lot of respect for Anthony, by the way. I mean, he's very, very thoughtful. I understand the point of the precedent on unrealized gains for people who may be ordinary making at a company or stock options. Here, I think you're talking about some of the richest people in the nation and the world.
Okay, so why does this fight exist at all? California has a budget hole. Federal policy changes cut billions from programs people actually use: healthcare, food assistance, and public schools. So the state went looking for money where the money is. The pro-tax argument starts here. The income tax does not really reach billionaire wealth. You get paid wages, that becomes taxable income, and you pay. But a founder's stock can rise for years. They borrow against it, never sell, and on paper, there may be no taxable income at all. So supporters say, fine, if income is the wrong door, tax the thing they actually have. Net worth, the shares, the private company stakes, the value that lets them live like billionaires even when their tax return looks weirdly ordinary. And the money is not abstract. The measure points it toward Medi-Cal, food assistance, and schools. That is why supporters see this as a direct trade. A tiny group of people with almost unimaginable wealth, funding services used by millions. But the case against it is serious too. Wealth taxes are rare for a reason. Germany, Sweden, France, places that tried versions of this, eventually backed away. They were hard to administer. Capital moved. The revenue was messier than promised. Then there is the paper wealth problem. Elon Musk's fortune once fell by about $200 billion without him becoming a different person overnight. Same man, same companies, the number just moved. So what exactly are you taxing? And in Silicon Valley, a lot of wealth is not spendable cash. It is private company stock, locked up shares, valuations, estimates. To pay a tax bill, a founder may have to sell pieces of the company they still control.
Find ourselves in today. And we see it and we'll talk about Pritzker's law in Illinois that passed this week. But we are now at a moment where we are saying there is no longer private property in the United States. This is one of the foundational rights that the founders of the United States tried to create a distinction between these other nations that everyone flees from, where a monarchy or a totalitarian government or some communist system says everyone owns everything together, or some small number of people own and control everything. And that's what this always comes down to, whether it's a socialist state or a communist state or a monarchy or some other totalitarian regime, there's a small number of people that own and control everything. And that is the brink that we're on, because they are trying to say, for the first time ever, there is no longer private property in the United States. That if the government can say everything that you've already paid your income tax on, and then you've bought and you now own, the government can take a piece of it every year based on the vote and the budgetary needs of an irresponsible fiscal legislature, we've lost it all. Yeah. And that's where we are. And we see this, it just passed in Illinois. People think it's just crypto, just like they think the billionaire tax is just billionaires. But anytime the government can take your private property after you've paid your taxes, bought something and put it in your garage, we are done for.
Yeah, we're going to get into
that is when the Politburo has unlimited capacity to tax and take and do what they want. That's the moment we're at.
And finally, trust. Skeptics look at California's record and say, wait, before you hand the state another giant pile of money, ask what it did with the last ones. From unemployment fraud to high-speed rail, the complaint is not just taxes, it is competence. So hold both ideas at once. There is a real argument for the tax, and a real argument against it. Because now the story gets devious. Chapter 2 is where the trap snaps shut. The key date is January 1st, 2026. The drafters did not pick that randomly. If you were a California resident on that date, the measure says you owe. So imagine the timeline. January 1st, the state records you as a resident. January 2nd, you can flee to Texas, Florida, honestly, Mars. But under the text of the law, the liability has already attached. And this is not me reading between the lines. The economists who designed the tax said the date was chosen precisely to stop billionaires from escaping. Difficult, if not impossible. That sentence is going to matter in court. Because the question is bigger than whether California can tax wealth. It is whether California can make a tax follow people after they leave. That is where this stops being a campaign ad and starts becoming a courtroom fight. Chapter 3 is the Exodus. These are the people who made it out before the January 1st deadline. Larry Page, Sergey Brin, Peter Thiel, Travis Kalanick, Steven Spielberg, Don Henke. One by one, they left the board before the trap snapped shut. And just 6 departures matter because of the scale. The estimate here is $27 billion gone before a single vote was cast. Roughly a quarter of the projected haul, walking out the door early. Which brings us back to Zuckerberg. He bought the Florida mansion after January 1st. Under the literal text of this law, that means he may still be on the hook. The estimate? $12 billion. That is why the mansion matters. Chapter 4 is the counterattack. Tax lawyers look at that retroactive date and see a glass cannon. It looks terrifying. It is designed to scare people into staying, but it may also be the part most likely to shatter. The due process argument is simple. States have power over people who are actually connected to them. But if someone is no longer there and the tax reaches backward, lawyers are going to ask whether California crossed a constitutional line. Both sides are extremely confident. Supporters say these arguments are old and courts have rejected them before. Opponents say the drafters basically admitted this was a trap, in writing. one of those readings is wrong. And the opposition is not bluffing. This is no longer a policy paper. It is a legal machine with money, lawyers, and a simple message. If this passes, we sue. Gavin Newsom, the Democratic governor of California, is against it. Not quietly, openly. He says it could wreck the state's competitiveness and push away the very taxpayers California depends on. And the economists do not agree either. Berkeley says the tax could raise $100 billion. Hoover says maybe 40. Stanford says it could actually lose $25 billion if enough wealth leaves. 3 credentialed estimates, 3 very different Californias. So when someone says the answer is obvious, be careful. The numbers are not obvious. The politics are not obvious. And the outcome is definitely not obvious. Chapter 6 is what it means for everyone else. If it works, the money goes to things ordinary people actually feel. Medi-Cal, food assistance, schools, emergency rooms staying open, community colleges staying affordable. There are really 3 endings. It passes and survives, and California gets the biggest safety net expansion in a generation. It passes, but lawsuits win, and years burn away in court. Or it fails, and the richest people in the richest state just keep doing what they were doing. Right now, it is close. Support is around 50%, but voters also worry that wealthy people will leave, which honestly is not a theoretical fear anymore. You have just seen the names. So the final question is not simple. Is this a long overdue correction to a tax system that cannot touch the top? Or is it a desperate state trying to tax money that does not really exist, run by people voters do not fully trust with it anyway? That is what California decides on November 3rd.